Have other microphone?
Yeah, we want to.
Record?
Yeah, we want to
Okay, okay.
record.
Uh,
The other
where do you
Or-
prefer? In the jacket or in the pants?
in the bed.
Okay. The mask.
Ah, yeah, sure. Everything fine, or it's okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Have the
No, off, on.
Okay. Perfect. So, if you want, you can be 3 minutes more,
Okay.
and we start like. And you have
Yeah.
20 minutes. It is yours.
Yeah.
Okay.
20 minutes. Eins, zwei, drei, eins, zwei, drei. Eins, zwei, drei, eins, zwei, drei. Eins, zwei, drei. Ja? Perfekt. Okay, so we're about to start in 2 minutes. So at 3:45 we will start. There was a slight delay in the presentation before. So I Next generation ATC radio with a security by design architecture is the topic we will speak about. I jumped in for my colleague Francesco. He could actually not be able to do it here to the World ATM Congress, so I will take it over his session. If you look into the ATC radio segment, one of the key developments is the migration to the IP technology. But there is also the security, which we have to take care about. ATC communication is actually considered as a critical infrastructure, so we have to manage this accordingly. And this means not only security, but also the availability. And the entire market is migrating to IP, and that brings us a lot of new possibilities how to implement security methods and resilience. And what we did is or if you consider the migration to IP, it brings a lot of new potentials. So we can implement very high reliability. You could not implement such a reliability in TDM networks because you cannot use multiple infrastructure to reroute between the infrastructure in a millisecond time. And this is something you can do on IP on a subsystem. You can use also geo-redundant systems. You can even use, and we will speak about geo-redundant radio sites. So you can just change between the radio sites there and back. You can implement, and that's what we do also on the radio, IP security levels, which you would never be able to do it on TDM network. Finally, you can much increase the operational effectivity using like synergies on the infrastructure, sharing the redundant architecture, sharing the data center. And finally, that's all we know with the remote radio sites or with the virtual centers, that you have a very good flexibility. You can just reroute the traffic from one center, from one tower to the other, or you can change from one radio site to the other without even like changing or significant impact into the operation. And this was one of the guidance we had for the development of the new radio. So what we said is, we have the IP technology, we have the security requirements, and yes, of course, we have also the VHF and UHF radio requirements. And this is everything what we combined into the new Series 5200 radio. So the security requirements were the key topic by implementing this radio. We did not implement new features on the AM side, because the AM side is very well defined and there is not much to bring, but on the IP side. And what we want to do is to allow flexible implementation in the modern IP network. And we will speak about this, how this can be achieved. And of course, like you know from all the radio and fast radios, we have excellent RF performance. So, but this is not the focus of the product, it's just given by the production or by the radio for firms. So let me introduce the Series 5200 radio too. And it's for the first time here on the World ATM Congress, we speak about the radio. We took completely new approach. So it's not just an ATC radio, it's something more. It's like a system element of a ground network. So this is a complete mindset change actually, that we don't consider the radio as something very important. It's kind of gateway between the ground systems, ground IP systems, and the wireless system. So this is the approach we used in the implementation. And exactly this approach we focus on how to integrate it in the rest of the infrastructure, how to operate the radio. So it must be the same operational like a router or switch in a network. So what we did new on the radio, we said we have to separate the main and backup network to save the costs our ASPs, our customers have by implementing redundant infrastructures. So we took the radio and put 5 interfaces to the back and 1 to the front. The 5 interfaces are 2 for main network, 2 for the backup network, and 1 for the management network. And from the front, there is a additional interface for the local maintenance. And this is something which is changing the status quo, because we say these interfaces are truly separated from each other. So if you look on the radio from the back, you have as I said, two interfaces for the main network, two interfaces for the backup network, and one for the management. And this is not just separation here on the interface level. It goes down to the core of the radio. So those interfaces, they are separate on the processing. So they have a separate interrupt on the CPU. So if you have a denial of service attack on main network, for example, then the second network is not affected because you do a denial of service, you run a very small packet onto the radio, you try to cause a very much load on the CPU, and this is not the case on the radio because the other interfaces are managed by another interrupt and managed by another core of the CPU. The entire software of the radio is also separated. So the software for the main part runs, it's separate, completely dedicated to one core of the CPU container, and the same on the two other interfaces, on the backup and maintenance. And we do a lot of more security stuff there, and we had a very nice presentation on that, so that we do a fuzzing of the software which is loaded into the radio. So every time the radio boots up, it has a different pattern in the RAM, so you cannot attack it so easily. We have implemented SE Linux, so the software which is used also by Androids implement the security in a mobile phone. So the same is here. Or we do run every single process by different users. So they're completely separated from each other. But I could speak here for hours. So it's separated down to the core. It's managed by independent software and hardware cores of the CPU. And if there would be a security issue on one of the networks, it does not affect the other networks. And this is the way how we want to change the way we are thinking about the radio, that we maybe do not need in the future main and backup infrastructure, but we may use a single radio to cover both, to reduce the cost of 50%. And this is a significant mind change. So this is how it looks inside. So you have a main VCS, separated single processing on a completely separated core, and all those networks meet just on the RF signal processing. The other innovation is the maintenance free, and we say the radio is completely maintenance free. You don't need to go on site and maintain the radio. Once the radio in operation, leave it there, operate it. So what you have to do is to implement oscillator self-calibration. So the oscillator in the radio is actually aging throughout the time, so it will slower and slower, and this must be calibrated. And there is a method. Normally, you go to the radio site, you use typically one of our test and measurement instruments, and measure the oscillator drift, and then you recalibrate the radio. What we did here on the 5200 radio is that we use the network time. And the network time is not accurate enough to calculate the oscillator drift over a short period of time, but over a long period of time. If you take a week into account, then you have enough time to count the cycles and to compare this with the NTP time, with the accuracy of the NTP time, and then we calculate the drift and calibrate the radio. And this is a significant change to the operational concept of the radio, because you don't need to go on site and do the calibration. So this was is adjusted. Then we also implemented simplified service concept. So typically, if you want to replace a radio on a site, then you have to set a technician over there, and he configures the new radio, set all the parameters, and put it into the rack. This takes quite a long time. We said, okay, that must be easier. And what we implemented is what we call a radio ID card. So the radio ID card stores the ID, the software, the configuration, and all the software options on the radio. So the entire software and configuration stack of the radio is on the small card. So you can, like in the mobile world, it's the SIM card, which defines your phone number with all the certificates the provider has to give you to operate in the network. And exactly the same is the radio ID card. So this radio ID card stores the entire configuration, entire software, everything's encrypted. And if you want to replace the radio, you take a new radio from the shelf, put the card inside, put it into the rack, and you operate the radio. So very easy, simple, error-free maintenance, which can be done by nearly everybody. So every technician who can disconnect the cables and take the radio ID card out and put it into the new radio can do the radio exchange on site. And finally, what we said is we have to simplify also the configuration. And what is the state of the art? A web-based configuration. So if you want to configure the radio from the front, you just take a notebook, you connect the notebook to the radio runs on the front interface DHCP server, so you get an IP address, and then you just need to start your browser and type S5200 in the address bar of your browser. That's it. Then you get a configuration page of the radio. And this is how it looks like. So it's a web-based configuration. So you can change every single parameter just directly using the browser. Of course, the radio has all the standardized maintenance interfaces like E137C, but like the configuration can be done directly using the web browser. Or we also implemented REST API so that you can configure the parameters using REST API. So you can actually automate it or integrate it into any other system just using this very easy to program interface. On the intuitive interface, you have the overview about the radio, the name, then you can change the operator, so it can be an operator, configurator, administrator, depends on the administration level. And we have expert view and simplified view. So also depends on the level. If you want to have a high number of information, then you go to the expert mode. And directly the manual is not on a CD or as a book, it is directly online, and you can directly access it on the radio. So what are the key features of the Series 5200 radio? As I said, the security by design, really we programmed the radio from the scratch. We did the architecture of the radio from the scratch with a separated CPU core, separated interrupts, with a software which is very hardened. There are no other processes running than others we need. SE, Linux, fuzzing, and so on. The true network separation in multiple cores. What we have is also virtual IP address redundancy, so that the radio can share with another radio IP address, and then once the one radio would fail, it takes automatically the IP address over, so you have a one-to-one, but also N+N redundancy on IP level. Of course, the radio detects, like the Series 4200 simultaneous transmissions. It does the self-calibration, simplified maintenance with a radio ID card, where you just very simply swap the radio from one to the other. And it has an intuitive configuration and excellent RF characteristics. So this is a very brief introduction of the Series 5200 radios. If you have any questions, you can ask here, or you can also write the product manager, Francesco Gualtieri, or visit us on our booth here just a few meters away. Do you have any questions regarding the radio? Sure.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the talk. Very interesting. I'm looking at it from a perspective of an air traffic controller, what my primary job is. Did you also improve the HF part? That means receiving quality, because I can observe in the last about 10 or 15 years that the receiving quality in ATC is becoming worse, and I think it's also because of a lot of consumer electronic from China and so on, which you can buy on eBay, and they are bringing some distortion into the HF environment. So are there any efforts from your company to improve the receiving quality? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting question. So from the radio point of view, we cannot do any actually more. We are we have the perfect sensitivity on the radio to get all the signals which have to be received. So the problem is actually more in the AM channel. So once we went down to 833 channel spacing, the audio quality was already dropped. Then, as you say, the interferences in the radio channels are getting more and more problematic. So at some point, I think the long-term vision must be to migrate completely to digital technology, to have a real quality transmission between the controller and the pilot. But this is something which will go for a longer period of time. In the meantime, we have, as a Rodenfahrt, also a number of test and measurement equipment which can analyze the interferences. So what we have is, on one hand side, the AFBA, which monitors the RF signal and the interferences from the point of view of the radio. But we have also monitoring receivers like the PR200, which can monitor the entire ATC spectrum and find the small disturbances. And that can be the radio electronics, somewhere from Far East, or also like transformators somewhere from the electricity company which are broken. And those tools actually can very easily find such interferences. So there are also an automated system which you can put a directional antenna on the top of on the roof of the car, drive around, and it shows you directly where's the source of the interference coming from. So such systems are in place, and actually the ANSPs or the spectrum operators in country have to make sure that those interferences are found and eliminated. Any other questions regarding the really mind-changing 5,000 radio?
Hello. Okay. So just wanted to, what kind of voice codec are you using on the VHF or IP side?
On the VHF? On the VHF, actually, it's amplitude, double-sided amplitude modulated signal. On the IP side. On the IP side. G29.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, then thank you for listening to the presentation. If you have any further questions, get in touch with us or join us in our booth. Thank you.